I'll just start by thanking you for allowing us to come down and certainly share some of our thoughts from Gateshead Council. Just in terms of introduction, my name is Phil McCarthy. I work as a team manager within the planning service of the council. I've worked in local government across the northeast of England for around about 15 years now. I've been involved in a number of different schemes, some significant urban development schemes, infrastructure schemes, as well. A number of those have included SuDS.
Okay, yes, I'm the SuDS officer at Gateshead Council. I've been with the lead local flood authority for about 5 years now. Prior to that, I was actually a landscape architect at the council for the previous 15 years. And before that, I had a brief time as a transport planner, so I've sort of got quite a good insight into multidisciplinary working, I think.
What this presentation does today, it's a perspective on our attempts to deliver good SuDS in the northeast of England. I'm just assuming that we all know where Gateshead is, by the way. It's in the northeast, next to Newcastle, if you don't know that already. So this is really just what we're going to run through. I'm going to start off by giving us a policy overview. We'll talk a little bit more about SuDS, and particularly from a Gateshead perspective, as we feel it's about more than flood risk. How we collaborate internally, externally, and then we'll finish with some examples. We've got some good examples, we've got some bad examples, and we'll just share any thoughts and key messages that we have around SuDS. So certainly at Gateshead, we do believe that a strong policy basis, as well as a strong collaborative approach, is increasingly helping us to deliver SuDS, and particularly those schemes that involve, that go beyond certainly just flood risk. We have examples of schemes that have delivered water treatment, amenity, as well as biodiversity improvements. Having said that, we certainly work in an area where there are a number of constraints to delivering good SuDS. They can be both physical, and there are also institutional issues that we've come up against, and those are the sort of things we're going to be exploring today. As I said, policy is important. And certainly within Gateshead, we have a core strategy plan that was adopted in 2015. That was a plan across Newcastle and Gateshead, so both councils worked together to deliver a plan. As I said, that's 2015, that's a post-MPPF plan, and that we feel is significant. That plan does set out a number of policies on flood risk and SuDS. It also sets out a number of specific site allocations. Those allocations were informed by a strategic flood risk assessment. I've just highlighted one policy on the screen there. I'm not sure if you can see, but the image on the right is CS 17. And what that states is it's key in that it allows us to request multifunctional benefits and ensure that water quality is maintained or bettered. The policy, importantly, certainly from our perspective, goes beyond that the requirements set out in MPPF Para 165, which again is highlighted on the screen. So as I said, we have a core strategy, and as it's 2015, a sort of relatively recent plan. That, as part of that plan, a number of sites were deleted from the green belt to facilitate growth, which we saw as a key need. There was an aspiration in removing those sites from the green belt to achieve good environmental design, partly as mitigation for taking those sites out of the green belt and sort of make it an easier sell, I guess. All of those sites that were allocated had specific SuDS suitability and viability assessments carried out to them. So they were site-specific studies looking at each of the sites that were to be allocated. One of those sites which we've highlighted on the screen there is what we call Dunstan Hill. That was a 53-hectare development, and that was coming forward for approximately 350 houses. So just to talk a little bit about that scheme, there was a policy requirement in the council's plan for that development to include a greenbelt buffer, as well as a 30-hectare area for habitat creation. Essentially, as it was a greenbelt release site, obviously it had a wildlife benefit, so to offset that, there was a need to provide the 30 area of offset area. Although that wasn't necessarily driven by a desire to provide SuDS, setting that significant area aside for sort of non-physical development allowed us to secure a significant area of land for SuDS. That scheme itself included a long and winding swale which fed a basin, all of which were enhanced in varied profiles and scrapes to create the habitat biodiversity. So we just feel that's one example of where working together, particularly when it comes to the GI planning, it can reap benefits across the disciplines. The next stage for us at Gateshead, moving on from the core strategy, is to develop more specific policies, and in particular what we call MSGP, which is making spaces for growing places. Again, that does seek to move on from this, certainly in this area, and it includes a greater focus on water quality and increases the opportunity for highway SuDS. What that policy also does is focuses on critical catchments which have flood risk or water quality issues. One such area I've highlighted is the Team Valley Trading Estate. The Team Valley Trading Estate is one of the North East's largest business and industrial parks. It's a critical area in terms of flood risk, and the River Team itself actually runs through the centre of the valley in that industrial estate. That is currently a failing water body under the WFD chemical classification. And we do feel that highlighting the WFD within the policy allows us to add weight to a requirement for multifunctional SuDS with a focus on water treatment within the trading estate.
This diagram just sets out a sort of set up the relationship between the various teams at Gateshead, and it's a particular strength in the way that the lead local flood authority, the planning authority and sort of specialist advice team work together. In the centre there, the Built and Natural Environment team was set up in 2016 with experts from the various departments such as highways, the ecologist, transport planners, etc., all brought together in one team. We could provide special sort of guidance on planning applications and sort of offer a one-stop shop service. I'm actually quite unique, I think, as a SuDS officer, being originally from a landscape background, and by close liaison with my colleagues in the highway and flood risk team, and then with our spatial policy colleagues too, we've got quite a sort of close working relationship set up there, which benefits overall outcomes on planning applications. Obviously, the Built and Natural Environment team is also able to work closely with the development management team or go directly to liaise with developers as well. We're currently trying to improve our service to sort of speed up the delivery of planning consent and work better with developers. We're just the last 6 months or so, we've set up provision of a service to provide a parameters plan to developers. So expert advice from all our teams, specialists, just sort of pointing out and identifying the key site constraints within an application and suggesting to the developer how they may best respond to planning policy for that site. To date, that's been quite well received, so we're sort of going to continue with that. Another idea we're bringing forward is immediately after submission of the full planning application is to bring the developer in for an early consultation meeting. It gives them the chance to set out their reasoning behind the design, explain why they may have made compromises. And we find that saves a lot of sort of unnecessary toing and froing during the sort of planning consultation process, and ultimately, hopefully, will lead to a speedier approval. We're also collaborating closely with our other colleagues in other authorities in the North East. There's about 6-7 authorities now in the north of the region. They're working very closely together, putting together a set of regional guidance. This is an attempt to agree standards for items as varied as minimum discharge rates, greenfield runoff calculations, freeboard, that type of thing. So we're trying to sort of stop that playing off of each other that you sometimes get between authorities and developers. In addition, as you can see with some of those standards there, we're trying to sort of push for high quality multifunctional SuDS, setting out that they should be overland and green SuDS, that they can be used for open space, and that water quality should always be a consideration too.
Yeah, so I was just going to look at a couple of examples and just start off with this one, which is we call Follinsby Max. This is what we feel is perhaps one of our more successful schemes in terms of actual outcomes delivered, but also sort of the way that a multiple disciplinary team came together to deliver it. Just some background, it was a 39 hectare warehouse development on the southeastern edge of Gateshead, also within an enterprise zone. It is located on the northern bank of the River Don, which you can see is obviously the squiggly blue line, Follinsby Max being the sort of pink area. The site lies within the upper catchment and was also within a strategic wildlife corridor. This is really just to highlight some of the process that we went through. So certainly a key part of the scheme's success was carrying the green-blue infrastructure vision from planning concept all the way through to delivery. In allocating the site, which was formed part of the core strategy plan I mentioned earlier, the council had to develop strong site-specific policies to protect the river corridor, provide enhanced green infrastructure, and for the provision of SuDS to mitigate flood risk. We did that through designing a site-specific policy, which is this one, and certainly parts of it are highlighted on the screen. The image to the right is what was sort of a framework plan, and that actually sat within the policy itself. So obviously the development platform area is the sort of yellowy colour, and there's a green-blue area surrounding it. So by identifying a net developable area of only 29 hectares out of the allocation of 39, that allowed 17 hectares of the site to be set aside for the provision of landscape and ecological buffer, which would wrap around the site. And so you can see that. Policy 3.5, which is the second one highlighted, required the enhancement of the River Don wildlife corridor, including the incorporation of SuDS and water pollution control measures. Certainly from our perspective, we do feel that providing the developer with that level of certainty, and particularly sort of the framework plan, that allowed them to come to the scheme with a real understanding of what the costing would be and what any likely viability issues may have been. They were also encouraged to work with us from an early stage, as well as partners within the River Don catchment, as well as other partners, and together we did develop a generous ecological landscape and drainage area. And this is really just to give a sort of a flavour as to the variety and range of partners who would be involved in developing that particular scheme. As I said, strong policy is important, but that's very much just the start of it. And this scheme certainly did benefit from an enlightened developer first off, which we feel was important, but also the council's multidisciplinary team, which Peter's mentioned earlier, which is in the top left, so the council specialists, as well as partners outside, so the external partners, neighbouring councils, River Don Partnership, Wildlife Trust, etc. Okay, that scheme again we feel is unusual, because what we were able to do was develop the green-blue infrastructure ahead of the actual building infrastructure itself. In terms of the sort of planning mechanism that we adopted, there was an outline application was submitted for the whole development, whilst a detailed submission was made for the green infrastructure zone, the development platforms, as well as the site access. That phasing allowed a rapid end-to-end planning process for the green infrastructure zone from submission of the original application in October 17 to commencement on the site in June 18. As well as flood risk, biodiversity was a key consideration on that particular site. As I said, it was in the wildlife corridor adjacent to the River Don. In response, the Habitat Creation, Restoration and Enhancement Scheme, which forms part of the green infrastructure, has been designed and tailored to provide significant improved opportunities for those key species identified, and you can see them on the screen, as well as benefiting biodiversity and ecological connectivity more generally. The final design for the Follinsby Max site included SuDS basins and swales that form permanent and seasonal wetlands within 13 hectares of predominantly open habitat. Those areas also include areas of grassland, native hedgerow, and 1.3 kilometres of restored and enhanced watercourse. Now, just to put it in context, I say that site delivered 13 hectares of open space, which is equivalent to around about 18 Premier League football pitches.
Ecological drivers behind the design were matched by the need to control surface water runoff to greenfield rates in response to downstream flood risk. There was also a desire to achieve good water quality too. In response to this, the main form of attenuation was in the form of two drainage basins, a smaller one to the west there on the left-hand side of the diagram, and a large one at the base. This is a large scheme. The western basin is 1,600 square metres, and the main east basin there is over 400 metres in length, with an area of around 7,000 square metres, with two separate discharges into the River Don, which runs along the very foot of the plan there on the south side of the site. Although the basins are designed to be dry, they also have smaller permanent areas of water in scrapes and small ponds to support a sort of range of habitat types. Following submission of the detailed application, which will be for the two development platforms, the big area in white there, we'll be looking for further treatment train to ensure that water quality will be at its best prior to entering the ecological zone there. Final polishing of the water will be delivered through twin swales down the western and eastern boundaries. Construction of the development platforms, river restoration and green infrastructure was completed in June 2018. River restoration works were substantially complete by November, and all SuDS green infrastructure and highway entrance works were completed in 2019 of this year. The main photo there shows the River Don, top right, and then just gives the scale of the overall development. One of the platforms is over 400 metres in length, and obviously you can see the sort of swale and basin on the right hand side, which is also fairly generous in size. Careful attention to detail was a priority on this site, and we feel it successfully delivered the original vision for the sort of SuDS design. The top left picture there shows the swale, which then feeds into the main 400 metre long basin at the rear. The more orange coloured areas are coir matting for stabilisation of the soil. And as you can see in the lower left picture, a riffle feature was created from the swale and down into the main basin. The reason the main basin's so low there is to connect into an existing outfall which went to the river. The right-hand photo was taken just about a month ago. It shows that the site's already coming on quite well in terms of vegetation establishment, and showing that quite a pleasing sort of outcome is already starting to take shape there. Two further images of the main basin. The sort of right-hand photo shows the sort of gentle gradients that were able to be achieved through the generous width of the green infrastructure zone, and certainly shows the sort of hoped-for ephemeral wetland system that the ecologist and all the sort of green space professionals were hoping to achieve, and that's certainly coming on in that photo. Another couple of images just showing the boundary swales with check dams in place also to create varied habitat opportunities. Although not specifically SuDS, the scheme also delivered a river restoration scheme quite successfully. The left-hand photo shows the original line of the River Don in the right-hand channel there, which was very straight, engineered, over deep as well. The scheme pulled back the left-hand bank to shallower gradients and also built in additional channels as well. The right-hand photo just shows that maturing now. It just shows that with site-specific policy, and then obviously the collaborative approach to all the disciplines involved, what can be achieved in terms of delivering multifunctional features on site. And I'll pass you over to Phil.
Okay, yeah, this is the second case study that we're going to look at. This is what we call Innovation Village. Innovation Village was a 41 dwelling demonstration project that showcased innovative building techniques, including modular houses, and also included smart and green technologies. It was a joint venture between the council and Home Group. That particular scheme coincided with an area-wide flood alleviation scheme that was a joint project between Northumbria Water and the council. An agreement between the stakeholders enabled the drainage basin to serve both the flood scheme and to provide some attenuation for the housing itself. So that did involve cooperative working between the LLFA, the council as flood authority, as planning authority, and the developer, and again through working together, as well as arriving at innovative solutions, we have been able to deliver the SuD scheme on the screen.
The regional scheme was in response to surface water and sewer flooding issues, principally along the A184, which is the dual carriageway there. New linear drains were installed along the southern edge of that road. You can maybe just see the blue line there. They fed into a swale to the bottom right of the main photo, and then also the drainage basin adjacent to the housing development. Home Group released the land for the basin on the proviso that they could also share it for the runoff from the housing scheme. But due to a sort of lack of volume, the lead local flood authority required the developer to really keep discharge to a minimum. Hence, there's a significant amount of source control actually going on the site there, including sort of a whole series of rain gardens, which are the green squares on the plan, and then the tan areas shown there, which is all permeable paving.
Okay, so on site, 95% of the highway runoff runs into the rain gardens as well as into the permeable driveways, which, as Peter's already highlighted. All drainage is via flush curbs with minimal use of road gullies. And the rain gardens and permeable paving will be adopted as SuDS features via a 106 agreement, but they won't form part of the adopted highway. This did involve a great deal of negotiation between the LLFA, the developers consultants, Northumbrian Water, the council's legal team, as well as the highway authority. And all of that was basically required to get through some of the historic perceptions of what was and was not possible in relation to both drainage and highway adoption guidance. The highway authority, just to highlight one particular point, was not entirely comfortable with the flush curbing between the highway and the footpath, as that does go against some of the guidance around providing access for the visually impaired, which would normally require a distinct edge to the footpath. But in this case, we were able to negotiate a flush edge, primarily because it was in a cul-de-sac location and was low trafficked.
So we've shown a couple of our more successful schemes. We'd also like to touch on where things have maybe not gone quite so well from a SuDS point of view in Gateshead. From working on sort of planning applications for the last 5 years or so, I still feel that a lot of developers seem less willing to embrace what I'd call green or surface level vegetated SuDS, which, from a landscape background, I'm very keen to achieve. I think one of the reasons, it's particularly a reason in the northeast, is a viability issue. It's often raised. Lower house prices and land values up in the northeast often seem to raise viability issues. Developers often seem to come to pre-app with fixed housing numbers in mind. During the planning process, these numbers will always seem to go up as well, just putting more and more pressure on the available space for SuDS. Original land deals between developers and landowners don't seem to be accounting for the full cost or land take of SuDS. And to compound this, housing targets are a very high priority for the authority, which again provides another pressure on the numbers and makes it very difficult to reduce housing numbers within an application if we're trying to free up space for the SuDS features. I feel there's a lack of knowledge of the benefits of SuDS amongst developers. We often see quite poorly designed and constructed features, even though if these were designed more sensitively and skillfully, this would create a distinct asset which would hopefully raise property values within developments. I've also noted there seems to be it's either a lack of education on SuDS amongst members of the public and our council members too. This is obviously a fairly common theme nationally, with fear of flooding or drowning or pollution within SuDS components. We've just recently had a major green belt release site where no amount of convincing of the flood risk benefits and improvements could convince the councillors that the situation wasn't going to be worsened by installing a large basin in their village. Just in terms of what's shown here, this is just an example where space gets squeezed. So a designer tried to squeeze in this drainage basin. From the LLFA's point of view, we were trying to press for a more usable area of open space, as it was the only one in development. And they responded by just putting in a 1 in 10 ramp down into the basin to access a sort of tiny little flat area in the centre, which is obviously doesn't benefit anyone, and I think would have been better with underground storage in that situation. Fortunately, this didn't make it to final approval. We have the usual experience of sort of maintenance and adoption difficulties. Gateshead does have what's known as the Gateshead model for adoption, with willing to take on SuDS features through the sort of 106 process. To date, in the last 4 years or so, only 2 developers have actually taken up on this. They generally seem to go for the sort of private management company approach. Now, whether this is due possibly to a sort of not wanting to go through the lengthy Section 106 process, that could be one of the reasons. We also feel there's a conflict between the requirements of good SuDS design and requirements of highways adoption as well. For example, if you try and secure rain gardens to drain highways and obviously treat the water quality there, there's a bit of sort of awkwardness. The highway authority doesn't want to accept private runoff into their basins or rain gardens. The council budgets are also very tight, so there's a question of who will maintain that feature too. So it's another stumbling block there. I feel there's still a lot of conservatism. Developers obviously turn to an engineer at the early stages of site development to develop the highways, the earthworks and sort of drainage scheme, and they bring on board an architect to sort of develop the layout. There often seems to be a complete lack of green space professionals early in the development phases. There's also either a lack of SuDS design skill or certainly a lack of collaboration between disciplines. I find that many consultants still work in silos, so an engineer will be working on the drainage design and the landscape architect will be working completely separately on a design for the open space, almost without an awareness that the SuDS is happening there. Anecdotally, in the northeast, I've heard that landscape architects feel that the SuDS design should be just left to the engineers without seeming to want to get involved themselves. We've also had cases of drainage engineers trying to produce planting schemes within drainage basins for sort of wetland areas, so something obviously needs to be done to get everyone working together better. Another quick example of sort of pressures on spaces or not really thinking the design through. And this was actually another scheme in Gateshead where the 1 in 30 runoff went into a precast concrete tank, which is that upper square there with the blue lines around it. That obviously necessitated a large easement around it as it was going to be adopted by the water company. And to the south of that, they had a geocellular storage as well. And the two features combined completely neutralised that area of green space, which is the only green space in the development, preventing any major tree planting, and obviously resulting in quite a sort of disappointing outcome for the green space design of that development. Gateshead has a fair few constraints as well in terms of SuDS design. The ground under the town is completely riddled with the legacy of coal mining. It's like a Swiss cheese with holes everywhere. So we, ourselves in Northumberland, were actually selected by the Coal Authority and the Environment Agency in a sort of pilot scheme developing guidelines to overcome the constraints on SuDS brought about by the mining legacy. Principally looking at groundwater flooding and pollution from mine water too. There's quite considerable concerns in that area at the moment with groundwater levels and mine water raising. We are getting incidences of mine water flooding. So if combined with SuDS features, there's a considerable concern there amongst the Coal Authority. Being in the north as well, we've got a lot of the substrate is clay, so the 2 feet items together obviously pose a considerable constraint on infiltration. It'd be interesting to see Kent's views on how the 2 areas differ in that respect. I find there's a tendency still to over-engineer SuDS features. The images on the right show sort of classic examples of over-large inlet-outlet features, and in this case, someone's come in and plonked safety railings on them as well, and then fenced off the whole of that upper basin again, which isn't ideal. I think one of the big issues regarding SuDS design, particularly on the bigger housing developments, is there seems to be an inability, certainly in our area, to design on a sort of sub-catchment scale. We still very much get the big pipe to a big sort of SuDS feature and not looking at lots of small features. Whether this is due to sort of maintenance concerns or I don't know if it just needs a fundamental look at how housing layouts are actually designed. I've also come to the conclusion there's a sort of lack of skills or knowledge in designing sort of treatment trains within SuDS schemes. If you sort of direct people to the SuDS manual, it's quite hard to sort of really get to the bottom of exactly how big a basin should be to sort of produce the correct level of treatment, etc. And in submissions, that aspect of SuDS is usually quite poorly covered, I find, both in flood risk assessments and drainage assessments. I've also pointed out within the LLFA we have a lack of monitoring resources, so it's hard to keep track and make sure features are built correctly on site. For example, this left-hand photo shows what was supposed to have been a rain garden, but unfortunately the contractor on site has actually put raised curbs around it, which completely prevents any water getting in there in the first place. Finally, I've listed again issues between highways and private sort of drainage features. Our sort of highways drainage people are always trying to ensure everything is kept separate, whereas obviously in any housing development there's not enough room for a highway SuDS scheme and then a SuDS scheme for the housing sat alongside it. So summing up, key messages in terms of sort of delivering successful schemes, obviously a sound policy framework we feel is essential, and genuine multidisciplinary involvement from all the specialisms. So engineers, landscape architects, ecologists, planning, all need to be working together closely from the outset. There's obviously scope to grasp any opportunities that are around, such as site-specific policies on ecology, for example, to turn these constraints or unique circumstances into opportunities to get better SuDS. I feel there's a need for better understanding of the costs and land take implications for SuDS amongst the sort of people who originally do the land deals. Hopefully that would free up more space. And better education and promotion of the benefits of SuDS is still required for developers. The age-old question, more resources for SuDS monitoring is required. And just at the bottom there, I feel nationally there's the odd case of sort of good case studies of successful SuDS schemes on big developments such as Lamb Drove, but they're few and far between. It'd be good if there was more case studies of genuinely sort of successful catchment, sub-catchment sort of designed schemes in large housing developments where developers are sort of going for high density housing. I think that's still a very tough nut to crack. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we've got a few minutes for questions specific for this presentation. There's obviously, we've got time for more sort of detailed discussion later on. So has anyone got any questions specifically they would like to ask our presenters? I've certainly got one. Early in your presentation, you showed, I think it was your internal collaboration chart. It was, what were there, 6 bubbles, 15 arrows, something backwards and forwards across it. So I'm just wondering, what systems have you got in place that make sure that all the stakeholders are involved in the collaboration and nobody's kind of missed off in the chain?
Well, certainly in the centre we have the sort of built and natural environment team with ecologists, urban design, drainage, transport planners. So the sort of core of the specialisms will automatically be consulted. So on any major application, the request comes direct from the development management team to the built and natural environment team as a consultation for all the relevant officers. And then we can obviously draw on further expertise from the LLFA. I mean, yeah, I sort of sit on the bridge between the two teams, so we obviously have very close cooperation there.
Very good. Any more questions from the room?
Thank you for the presentation. Mervyn Perter for Flood Management Support. You mentioned that the detailed submission of the blue-green work was submitted along with the outline application. There's quite a feat to achieve that, I think. And I'm just wondering whether that was just one application then, or was there 2 applications? How did you achieve the detailed aspects at the outline stage?
It was a single application, but it included, essentially it was a hybrid scheme, so it included full detail of the green-blue area, and the buildings themselves were reserved matters, so they would come forward as separate reserved matters applications. Basically, through doing that, that was allowed the developer to get on, put the infrastructure in, which is actually in now. The buildings themselves haven't actually started yet. Essentially, the developer wanted to have a sort of a build platform that would be ready for market. So essentially, all of the infrastructure's in, so it's now a market-ready platform, basically. Okay. But that was very much. That was fortunate that the developer took that approach. It wouldn't necessarily be something that we could insist upon.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Ray Drabble, West Sussex Lead Local Flood Authority. Thanks for interesting insight to your schemes. Particularly interested in this global model, this Gateshead model for adoption. I wondered if you could provide a few more details of it, and surely it's got to be embedded in the S106 process, even if it simplifies it.
Yes, it actually builds on what they were doing at Darlington Council. Basically, the land that the SuDS sits on, for the first 5 years of the development, it all sits with the developer. The developer's required to set up a private management company, and the house owners pay a land rent into that company for the maintenance. After 5 years at handover, the freehold of the land is transferred to the council, so enabling us to maintain control of the feature and who maintains it. But we don't actually take any active involvement in collecting money or in the maintenance of that. That stays with the private management company. In terms of the technicalities of the 106, it just sort of, I don't know if you can offer any more on that, or yeah. It sort of sits with our legal department, but yes, it's basically agreed to the 106 process.
Graham Fairhurst, I chair the susdrain PSG. The diagram you've got on the screen at the moment is obviously one that's causing some interest, and to me, I just wondered if you could briefly say anything about the merits and demerits of amalgamating the Sustainable Drainage Officer role within the Lead Local Flood Authority role.
Until the last year or so, I actually sat within the sort of flood risk management team, which is a sort of joint team of both highways management and flood risk. So already I was within the lead local flood authority in a close-knit team anyway, so then we were extracted to form this built and natural environment team. Fortunately, we all sit in the same office, the development management, ourselves and highways, so it's very easy to sort of liaise closely anyway. So far, no real problems. I still represent the LLFA and it's recognised to developers that I do that, so it seems to work well.